Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. It's February 21st, 2014, on a cold Friday morning, and I'm delighted to be here with another version of our Meet the Methodologist session. We have 3 webcasts set up this afternoon, and unfortunately Hannah Rothstein, one of our 3 presenters, was delayed getting in last night, so she won't be participating in this Meet the Methodologist session. But we are very pleased to have 2 very distinguished visitors, including Ann Langley and Dave Woehr. And so let me begin by welcoming you both to Motown and to CARMA. So I'd be interested in how it is that you ended up in graduate school studying people and organizations. Yeah, we'll take, what we would do is we kind of take turns who goes first. So I'll call on you to get us started this time.
Geez, I don't know what to, I ended up studying industrial psychology at Georgia Tech. I won't say it's by accident, but when I started out going into school, I had thought about possibly going into a career in law. Started as pre-law, decided that really wasn't a major. Got into psychology because that was interesting. Really enjoyed studying psychology as an undergraduate, and then had thought about going into a graduate school in psychology, and really had thought much about clinical. But I ended up doing a field practicum while I was an undergraduate at the United Way Crisis Line in downtown San Antonio. And this was one of these things where they gave you some basic training, and they put you on the front line of answering crisis calls. And it was everything from general information to I'm going to kill myself. Mm-hmm. And it was so incredibly stressful that I thought that was the end of clinical psychology for me, maybe the end of psychology completely. But then ended up talking to a faculty member who was actually a social psychologist, and he said, well, you know, there is IO psychology, which sounded quite interesting to me. Plus they also said, well, that's where the money is too. I don't know where they got that, but anyway, that was, so I decided at that point that, you know, I was going to look at a career in go to grad school in industrial psychology.
Yeah, well, I would, we can only surmise that that experience has served you very well in dealing with both graduate students in your role as a faculty member, but also as a department chair in dealing with some of the faculty that you probably have. And how to work with you?
I didn't start out with an idea that I was going to be an academic or go into graduate school. After I actually did a master's in operations research, and on the basis of that, I got a job being an analyst, both in the private sector and the public sector. And at some point, I sort of saw that if I wanted to move up in that job, I would have to become a manager. And that wasn't all that appealing to me. I very much enjoyed the research side of it, and I thought, well, why don't I just take that step and do a PhD. And so I moved into doing a PhD in management. I had no idea when I went into the program exactly what I would do, but I was intrigued by the idea of theorizing about some of the things I had seen as a practitioner, actually. So, yeah.
Well, so you're both obviously here to do methods-related talks. So what was your graduate training like in the area of stat and methods, and was there anything that happened that kind of planted the seed that got you interested in methods as well as the substantive types of topics that you get in graduate school?
At the time I was doing a PhD, this is the joint doctoral program in Montreal, which is between 4 faculties of management. The methods training was rather basic, actually, and we had 4 different profs from the 4 different universities who were giving partial courses, and I'm not sure that it was particularly, it was rather superficial, let's put it that way, in terms of methods. And so when it came to actually doing research, I sort of found I had to start from very much on my own. I'm a qualitative researcher. At that time also there were less textbooks out there about how to do it, and so I found I was discovering things a little bit on my own. And I think that possibly the work that I started to do in writing about methods was really for me. I had data, I didn't know what to do with it. I looked at how people were dealing with those kinds of things, and I decided to write about it. So it was kind of the wrong way around, you know, doing it first and then learning and theorizing about it later.
Mm-hmm. And so was there, what were some of the forces that led to your involvement more on the qualitative side of things? How did that come about?
That's very interesting. I think that I was, actually I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics, right?
Yeah.
So that is interesting. When I was working in being an analyst, I started to realize that a lot of what I was seeing was not something you could really analyze mathematically. Mm-hmm. And I started to get interested in the human side of doing analysis in organizations. And that's what my thesis was about. The title of the thesis was The Role of Formal Analysis in Organizations. So that was kind of an extension of thinking about what I'd been doing. And in terms of doing qualitative research, I think I was in an environment where that kind of research was getting to be popular. One of the members of my thesis committee was Henry Mintzberg, and at that time he was promoting qualitative research very much. I was very much influenced by him, and I think that if I hadn't been in that environment, maybe I would be Dave.
Well, those are, you know, the more you chat with people, you learn how many of us end up. There are some situational circumstances that, had they been different, who knows? So how was it with you, Dave?
You know, very much the same in terms of being a product of my environment. I ended up going to graduate school at Georgia Tech, and there were some very strong quantitative people there. I worked with Larry James, I worked with Stan Malayak. There were other graduate students that were incredibly strong. I did some work with Chuck Lance, he's a colleague of mine at Georgia Tech, and really kind of got into the methodology and the quantitative part of that. Number one, because it kind of fit my personality. I like to measure things. I like the idea of quantifying and measuring. And two, because they were such a strong group of individuals in methods there. But during most of the time I was there, I didn't feel particularly strong in methods, and I'd come to find out that's because I was with such a strong group of individuals that were there doing that. Most of those people, Larry James, those kind of folks, are incredibly intimidating in terms of some of the things that they've done. But then, having gone out, realizing kind of what a tool set that I developed there, and then I started to teach some of the things. And for me, that was a real eye-opener, that I was actually able to go out and teach some of those things and implement that and put that into my work. Was
there any particular challenges that you remember during that time about learning research methods? Some things that were particularly frustrating or difficult?
Well, I remember going into my first stats class in the first year of graduate school and taking an ANOVA class. And this is somewhat ironic in that I'm going to be talking a little bit about ANOVA this afternoon in our talk, but this was an ANOVA class. It was my first exposure to analysis of variance. Charlie Ritchie was teaching this class, and he had a system, and I was struggling. I got out of that class, I hate to say it, I don't know if I want to say it on tape, but I struggled. I got out of that class with a B just by the skin of my teeth, because he had a system where he would teach, and you'd go in to do an exam, and if you didn't know the answer, he would sell you clues for points. So if it was a 15-point question, he'd say, well, if I tell you this is going to cost 3 points, and then you could... I was the only one that would end up with negative points on a question, because his clues didn't help me a bit. So that almost ended my methodological career right there.
How about for you, Ann? Anything? So you were, from your comment, was learning a lot of this on your own or as you went?
Yeah, and I think that was the challenge, is to find ways to deal with qualitative data. It's easy to collect qualitative data. It doesn't, I mean, there are some things that you need to be careful about, but that's not the hard part. The hard part is analysis, what you do when you get it. So you feel completely overwhelmed once you've got, you know, I had something like 80 interviews and I had observations from 3 different organizations and endless documents, and then where do you start? And that was really the challenge that I was faced with, and I think that kind of structured my thinking in terms of, you know, how could I help people with this?
Yeah. So, well, you had success as a graduate student and have gotten into the academic kind of side of things. And I'm curious and interested in people and what they thought it was going to be like versus how it's turned out. So was there anything particularly that surprised you about life after graduate school that was particularly different than what you would have expected it to be? I mean, from my own case, I thought, well, I'm going to become a faculty member, I'm going to make more money, I'm still going to be teaching and doing research, but I'm not going to have to go to classes. And of course, I found out that things were quite different than that. So what was the experience like for you guys?
Go ahead, Ian.
I think that the biggest thing is how your life gets sliced up into tiny little slivers, and that how you have to cope with that. You know, when you're a graduate student, you're working on your thesis. It seems to be the most important thing in your life. You're focusing on one thing. When you become a faculty member, everything gets sliced up. So you've got your teaching load, you've got your administrative responsibilities, you're reviewing, you're doing endless things, and then there's research, and that research has to find a place in your day. And that's a really tough thing. So I make, you know, meetings with myself in order to do research, because otherwise you just don't get the time to do it. And it's kind of disappointments for me. I really love field work. I don't do so much field work anymore because of this issue, just the slicing issue and the number of other responsibilities that build up. But I love it, so I'm not complaining. But you know, this is something you have to cope with when you become a faculty member, which is.
Yeah. How about with you, David?
I think the biggest shock for me was kind of the imposter syndrome. You walk out of the door of graduate school and into your first faculty job, and all of a sudden students are coming to you asking questions. And you don't have your advisor to run to anymore. And they think you know more than you think you know. And so it was a little bit intimidating at first, changing role. I think a lot of what I did, teaching and research, stayed the same. It was just in a very different context. So it was kind of flying without a net kind of issue. And I think that, more than anything else, was the eye-opener for me.
Yeah. Well, you both obviously have managed that transition very well and had a lot of success in research, which has led to involvement as in the review of manuscripts. And so I'm often interested in what people see as being the most common shortcomings in the types of papers that they review. And that's particularly of interest here because imagine you review a lot of qualitative papers and you review a lot of quantitative papers, and maybe there are some common kinds of things that authors are missing out that apply in both settings. So from your experience, what are those shortcomings in the qualitative studies?
So in qualitative research, a first thing, and it's kind of very basic. Once you solve that, then we arrive at another level. But a first level is doing the analysis very thoroughly and demonstrating the rigor of your work. Actually, responding to that should be easy. I mean, it should be easy to do good, rigorous analysis. So let's say that that can be done and that's fine. But the problem is that there's another level, which is not only must you do it well, but you must have a contribution. A contribution. And making a contribution with qualitative research, I think, is particularly difficult because you've got to say something different and interesting, which will engage people in doing further things. So at the same time, you have to surprise people a little bit, but not too much, because if they're too surprised, then they won't believe you. So it's fixing that, being able to situate yourself with regard to previous literature and show that what you're putting forward is something that's interesting and valuable. And I think that the nightmare of the qualitative researcher is establishing their theoretical contribution without denying what has already been done and building on it to develop something new. And I think that's the really 100% biggest challenge. And the best researchers, that's what they're able to do. And the rest, the qualitative analysis, that's a priori. You must have that. And often one of the points will be, well, your analysis, but that can be solved. The other one is more difficult.
Yeah. How about for you, Dave?
I think similarly, a lot of the issues involve implementation. And I think for me, in reading a lot of manuscripts, where you start to see problems is where you start to get a feel for, well, people are doing things just because they've been told they're supposed to do those. Reporting reliabilities, including control variables, how they report their analyses. And so it becomes clear that a lot of times people don't understand why they're doing it, or some of the assumptions that underlie that. And you can get yourself into a lot of trouble in doing that, and leads to some inconsistencies. And I tend to see that a good bit.
Yeah. So, how has that experience that you were just describing influenced you as a researcher and an author? Right? That you must at this point feel like you got something out of that enables you to do what you do better. So how has it influenced you, that experience as a reviewer? How do you approach the craft of your research or of writing up your research differently?
You know, for me, I think it's been the other side of that has been the most informative or the most influential, and that is when I get to review pieces and I say, oh, the best papers to me is, oh, I wish I would have done that. Mm-hmm. And I see either writing style or analyses that have been done that are impressive, or things that I want to include, that I think it leads me to think about some of the work I do differently. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's so much the mistake or the downside, but the upside of what I get to see more often as a reviewer.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, my answer is very similar. What I do a lot, and I think that doctoral students should do as well, is I read a lot. I read a lot of papers that are submitted to journals, but I also read a lot of published papers. And you can learn an enormous about how to write and how to present work from very, very systematically, carefully, not just surface, but read an article with review to looking at how is this argument constructed. Okay, and in qualitative research that's particularly important because I think in quantitative research, like you say, there's this kind of recipe. You do this, 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 and this. But in qualitative research, there are all kinds of ways of making your argument. So try and understand the way people have structured their argument. Just looking at article introductions and saying, okay, what are they doing in the first paragraph? What are they doing in the second paragraph? You can learn a huge amount about writing. And it's like reading papers with new eyes when you do that, because then instead of seeing the overall message, you see the way the message is constructed. And I think that this is a very helpful way. Now, it's helpful. On the other hand, if everybody does that, we're just going to reproduce each other. So you have to be able to, at the same time, make sure that your voice is coming over. So you shouldn't hesitate to do something. Okay, I can see that this is interesting. I can do this, but then I can add a new approach to looking at it. So you mustn't get too embedded in the recipe or in the cookbook. You have to see, oh, how could I do this differently to bring an idea forward?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I mean, I think part of, you know, when you're writing for the scientific literature in journals, you forget sometimes that you really are telling a story. And that's one of the things that it took me a while to figure out. It's not just the data that you have, it's not just the ideas and the thesis, but it's how you construct that, and it's the story that you tell. And sometimes that almost becomes more important. And I don't do much qualitative research, because one of the things I've seen from the qualitative research that I think we, on the quantitative side, don't do as well, and that is put together a very coherent story based around the information that we have, the data that we have.
Yeah. So we've talked some about your experience as a grad student, your transition into being a faculty, and your perspectives and your research and reviewing. Are there anything that kind of builds on that you would offer as advice to a person that's just coming out of graduate school who wants to be a successful scholar in today's changing environment, where there's so many different ways that universities are changing and the publishing process is changing? You know, what kind of things do you tell your own students about what they should try to do?
I tell my students a lot of things. I'm not sure that they should listen to all of them. But one of the things I realize is that the environment, the academic environment, is changing dramatically. And there are days when I think, well, I'm glad I'm not having to go into it now. Mm-hmm. But that's just getting old, I guess. But I think for me, the big key to keep in mind is the idea of perseverance. That very often in this business, it's not making an immediate impact, but it's just keeping at it. When you think about the number of journal articles that even people that publish a lot, the number of times or how often that has to be submitted and resubmitted and goes to different journals, you just got to get used to that. And I think the idea of longevity and perseverance is a huge key, and especially when you're young and you're going into your first job and you've got tenure looming on the horizon. That's a very hard thing to deal with, and I think that results in a lot of stress. But just recognize that going forward, even past tenure, that's a huge key to success.
What about you?
Yeah, I agree with what you just said. Another thing I would say, I think, is every one of us has a kind of different history, and that history is part of you, and you can use it, and you should use it. When you move into academia, your background and what you know that other people don't know that are going to be looking at similar topics is part of your competitive advantage. If you want to talk in strategic terms, in terms of positioning yourself as an academic, some experience that you have had where you have tacit knowledge, you may not even know that you have it, about how things work in certain areas of organizations, that can give you a step up and a move ahead, and also it may be something you can get passionate about because that experience probably had some effect on you. So I would suggest that mobilize that, and don't stay there. As you move ahead in your career, you will. I mean, any little thing, I always think you should take it as an opportunity for learning. So you have a terrible experience giving your first course. It's an opportunity for learning. You're reviewing, you're advising a doctoral student, and really this topic is not particularly interesting. It's an occasion for learning, and that learning you will input into everything you ever do in the future. So allow a little bit of variety, but build on who you are. That's what I would say. I think sounds.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, you are here with us today because of the webcast that you're going to do this afternoon. Could you kind of give us a preview of what you're going to be talking about, and maybe how you got interested in it?
I'm going to be talking about the multi-trait, multi-method matrix and its application, talking a little bit about its history and background. One of the things I'll point out in my talk, if you look back at the Campbell and Fisk article in 1959, if you go on Google Scholar, it has something like 12,000 citations. That's the article I want to write. 12,000. I never will, but that would be. So there is something there that has been incredibly influential, and you trace that kind of early background with the idea of construct validity through almost everything that we do. And my talk is going to focus on how we've implemented that methodologically and some of the different approaches to that and what that means for measurement.
Okay. Ann?
Well, I'm going to be talking about process research, and process research is about understanding how and why things evolve over time. And I think that it's a very important area of the world to understand evolution over time, which we kind of tend to not deal with as much as we should, I think, in academic research. And I got into this because I wrote a paper about this, and I'm going to build on that paper in this talk. But I got into this, as I said before, because I was faced with the problems, and I thought, well, how have other people dealt with this problem? How do you analyze data over time, qualitative data over time, and make something of it? And so that's what the talk is about, and the talk draws on what I learned from looking at how other people had done that. So a lot of it is very derivative. There's not a huge amount of, it's just bringing together how other people have approached these things, and adding my own little grain of salt.
Okay. Last, I'm always interested in kind of the personal side of things. So what do you guys like to do when you're not working? And is there anything that you find is something that you can count on, that if you do it, it leaves you kind of inspired and motivated as you go back to your work?
I'll let Ann answer that one first.
Well, I'm expecting a grandson any day. That's what kind of motivates me at the moment. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And I think that family is what keeps you focused and in perspective. So I think that's very important, and this is something that I need at this point. So
yeah, well, that must be exciting, and we hope it goes well.
I agree. I mean, family is a big part of it, but I'm at a very different stage. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter, and that pretty much uses up my free time.
Yeah. Well, we are very happy to have you both here to do the webcasts, and we're always very appreciative of the effort and the time that people put forth to travel and prepare an hour-long lecture, and we're really looking forward to it as well. So thanks so much for being here, and thanks for chatting with us this morning. Thank you.